Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This was fascinating testimony. I'm new here, so let me ask a question on the Asian banks and what they did to solve their problem. When we passed Dodd-Frank, I'm a great believer in not reinventing the wheel. Did we take a look at what regulations or what new rules the Asian banks put in place as we designed Dodd-Frank? And would have that made sense, and does it still make sense to do so if we haven't?
Senator, you have to ask your colleagues what they did and didn't look at. My impression, as somebody who followed it closely and who testified to Congress on a number of occasions, is that we were very taken with the exceptional nature of the United States. And there were, of course, various lessons we could have also drawn from Scandinavia with regard to, Mr. Larrick hit the nail absolutely on the head. Make banking boring. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the Scandinavians have come through this crisis in relatively good shape from a fiscal point of view and from a growth point of view, in part because they had terrible problems with their banks in the 1990s, got completely out of control, just like emerging markets had this problem in the 1990s, and they cleaned them up, and they made them much more conservative and much more careful, including much higher levels of capital. So I fear that we either didn't look enough at international experiences or didn't draw, in this dimension, the right lessons.
Senator, there's a great irony here. What the Asians and other emerging markets adopted after their financial crises was an idea called an international banking standard, which was actually invented by one of our staff at our Peterson Institute for International Economics, Morris Goldstein. And the idea was then picked up and heavily promoted with the emerging markets by the U.S. government, by the International Monetary Fund, and by all right-thinking people who wanted greater global financial stability. But we viewed it as their kind of adopting our ideas, and the implication, as Simon said, was that our systems were fine and should be the model. And then over the succeeding decade or so, whether or not our systems were fine back then, our systems certainly eroded and failed to keep up with the technology in the industry. The regulatory zeal dropped sharply, everything was fine, we were exceptional. But it was actually the U.S. and the West, with its more sophisticated financial systems, that developed, promoted those ideas, and then, as often happens in history, the people that adopted them got well ahead of the curve.
But we turned our backs on them, basically. I mean, again, the question I'm asking, would we be smart to look at those and adopt those? I mean, just
certainly to look at carefully. And Simon rightly mentioned there are some other high-income countries, including European countries, which have actually done this quite well. And Sweden and Finland are two cases in point, where they had incredibly deep financial crises in the early 1990s, put their houses in order, dramatically reformed their economy. You know, we used to think Sweden, the socialist economy, how could it ever succeed? Mm-hmm. Sweden has been the star in the whole, even more than Germany, in this recent European economic situation, which has come through this current crisis, not totally unscathed, because the neighborhood is rough, but largely unscathed, doing very, very well. And their finance minister has been voted Finance Minister of the Year around the world, et cetera. And so, having gone through a crisis, taken a serious reform in your financial system and your macro policy, pays off heavily when you then get hit again. And my fear, just to reiterate the obvious, we've all said it, is that the U.S., which has so far escaped that existential crisis, may be lagging badly and may wind up paying a very heavy price as a result.
Senator, a specific suggestion for you. I can connect your staff with the relevant people in Singapore. They have a relatively large financial sector. They know they live in a dangerous world. They're extremely careful with regard to how they operate it. They learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. They think the way we operate, they'll tell you in private, they're not going to say this in public, they think the way we operate our system is reckless and irresponsible and poses big dangers to ourselves and everyone else. And remember, Singapore, in terms of fiscal prudence, is a model that we should all aspire to, even though it would be pretty hard for us to get there. So if you want those connections, I'm happy to provide them.
I can't help but ask a question. How many pages was their piece of banking legislation?
That I would have to get back to you on, Senator. There's no question, though, that they have a very tough, skeptical body of regulators who are absolutely not captured by the financial sector. In fact, it's the one place in the world where the regulators are paid as much as the people who work in the private sector and work harder. I'm not suggesting you'll want to go there for the United
No,
States.
I was
It's a
going to make
model
that
in
point.
regard
Obviously,
too.
bank regulators don't have the incentive that the bankers have in terms of circumventing the so. Dr. Bernstein, I was fascinated by your assessment of Europe, and the thought that kept going through my mind was that past performance doesn't guarantee future results. I hope you're right, but I'm assuming Dr. Larrick and Dr. Johnson probably aren't in agreement with you in terms of what I guess I'd call a rosy scenario. I mean, Dr. Larrick, you want to comment on Dr. Bernstein's assessment?
I think I'm actually more optimistic than Dr. Bergsten, because I believe the Germans are going to drive Europe to a stable fiscal union. It'll take a number of years. We were debating before the conference whether this was the 17th summit and the 19th Republican presidential candidate debate, or the 19th summit and the 17th Republican presidential candidate debate. We have many more summits to go, but they'll get there, I believe. But there is a large risk. One of my colleagues at AEI, John Macon, uses an analogy. He said, this is a dangerous operation. You could have the most skilled surgeon in the world, but things can go wrong. And so something could go wrong. I believe that the Europeans will manage this process. I think the Germans have now found the tools to do that, which are just to keep interest rates really high on all the politicians that are not of the weak countries, and that will force them to do what German threats and pleading and reasoning did not succeed in doing for 2 years. And secondly, the new strategy, which is, if you agree, that's great, and you'll get our support. If you don't, go with God. You're on your own.
And that's basically the same discipline that will be imposed on the U.S. Our creditors will increase our interest rates to force us to do what we need to do.
Hopefully we'll do that. Yes, that will be what will happen in the end.
Okay, thank you.